Set your course for the Hoth
Takes podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Hoth Takes. We have a very exciting episode for you today. I'm Grace Seegers.
I'm Haley Bird-Wilt.
And I'm Eric Geller.
And today we have very special guest star, Sam Brodey, who is here to talk about a topic near and dear to every Hoth Takes listener's heart, and that is pod racing, specifically the scene in episode 1 of Phantom Menace, where they do that very famous death race, and through which Anakin is able to become free and become a Jedi and all that jazz. But it's just a really cool scene. So Sam has been talking to me about coming on to Hoth Takes to talk about this topic for like a year now, and we finally made it happen. So Sam, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
So Sam is very excited about pod racing. We've had many conversations about it, about why it's so cool. So I really just want to let him kind of run with this. So just to start, why do you love pod racing so much, Sam? And what makes that sequence so good?
Yeah, I've reflected a lot about this. I think what's so cool about the pod racing sequence, aside from the fact that like it's probably the best like part of the Phantom Menace, just in terms of sheer entertainment value. I'll we could maybe debate that later versus like the final lightsaber battle, but it's just like immensely entertaining and fun and well constructed as a scene. But I think the broader thesis here, and I think why I'm sort of hung up on the pod racing scene and have continued to think about it over the years, is that like it sort of captures the broader Star Wars universe in a way that I think few other scenes in any of the films do. It's sort of like this weird little glimpse into the society of these planets and of a part of the galaxy, and it sort of takes its time and stays there. You know, I was rewatching the scene today, and like aside from like the racing itself, there's like the crowd and like the vendors in the crowd and like these little details that kind of add some texture to the galaxy, and you know, more broadly like the ethics and how brutal it is, and you know how kind of cheap life is. It's all you know, encapsulated by the pod racing scene. And then the final thing I'll say before we talk more is it's just like it looks great, it sounds great. Like I feel like I can hear the pod, like I could hear like Sebulba's pod racer, like the sound of it. Like if I hadn't rewatched any of those scenes today, like I could still remember the sound, and it's just really like it's insanely well done. And it's transporting. So that's my elevator, not so elevator pitch about why pod racing is amazing.
Yeah, I also rewatched the pod racing scene in anticipation of this episode, and honestly, it holds up. Like, yeah, the CGI is a little clunky, but it is really engaging, and I think that you're right. You really see the society of Tatooine in particular, and how kind of messed up it is that this 9-year-old child is participating in a death race to earn his freedom. Like that seems a bit messed up. So I also want to hear your take a little bit more, and also Eric and Haley, about the sort of world building element of this.
Well, I'm just grateful that it gave us Sebulba, who is one of the top 5 characters in all of Star Wars. I don't know. I mean, so I've never been much of a racing person. Like, every time I watch a movie and there's like a car chase or something, I sort of zone out. So the pod racing has never been my like favorite scene in the Phantom Menace.
What is your favorite scene in the Phantom Menace?
Probably the trade talks.
Yeah, that checks out.
Just kidding. No, I don't know. That's hard to say. I would have to think about it. I do like.
I got us off track. Sorry.
Yeah, off track. I mean, obviously, I like the final lightsaber duel, but I do think that all the points that Sam made are very valid in terms of sort of illuminating Tatooine a lot more and sort of Anakin's life. For that reason, it's valuable. For me, it was never like super exciting to watch. I mean, maybe when I was a lot younger, but even back then, like I don't know, I liked watching the characters interact more than, high-speed death chases or races. So, but I do agree that it's a little bit sketchy, and we can discuss this later, but I just learned that canonically, the New Republic banned it because it was too dangerous, which I tend to agree with. I think that was a good decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does a great job of showing you what life is like on the Outer Rim and contrasting that with the sort of sparkling jewel of Coruscant and how everything there, at least topside, not getting into the underworld, but, above the surface of the planet in those glittering skyscrapers, it's a very regimented world. It's a world with a lot of double speak, a lot of people wearing various masks in political forums. Here, everything is out in the open, plain spoken, that the aggression and the sort of vitriol and animosity that you have anywhere, including in the political arena, is not masked here. It's out in the open, and it's plain for all to see, and it's physical in a way that it isn't on a planet like Coruscant. So it gives you this nice contrast in The Phantom Menace between these two worlds, which, as you can tell, I think are not all that different at a very base layer, but are presented differently. And on Tatooine, you just don't have those inhibitions. You don't have those restrictions. Again, as Shmi Skywalker says in the movie, the Republic does not exist out there. There are things that you can do because people aren't watching. And pod racing is sort of the classic example of that. So in addition to being a great spectacle, it's also a reminder that people can be abused and exploited on Tatooine, including, having your enslaved, adolescent child kid who works in your shop also race for you and win you money or whatever, or try to win you money. I mean, that's not that relationship would not be possible on Coruscant, not least because slavery would be illegal there. So this is a way of showing that you can get away with things on Tatooine that you can't, in the core worlds.
Yeah, I think these are all super good points. And I do think that, like, just thinking about, sort of the political side of stuff that Eric was getting into, it's also, like, aside from kind of providing some of the texture of like, ordinary people's lives, you do get an interesting glimpse of power. I mean, like, it's the Hutts that put this on. And you get a real, like, bread and circus vibe to the whole proceedings that it's not just because I just rewatched Gladiator on, like, a long plane ride, but I was feeling that a little bit. Rewatching the pod racing scene today, and how Jabba comes out, and he's like clearly, the host and putting this on, and the race only starts when he like spits out some critter's head onto a gong, and the rigs get going. So it's sort of subtle, I guess, maybe by the standards of the prequels, or maybe not, but it also is like a very clear glimpse at who has the power on this planet and what do they do to keep the power.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a example of some of the stuff that George Lucas does best, which is fundamentally bare bones. Pod racing is just fun. You watch it, it's fun. Kids love it. It's like a video game. There was a video game, which we'll also mention later.
A very good video game. Just saying.
We will get to that, to the very good video game. But so there's that basic element of it just being really fun to watch, having that good sound aspect to it, great visuals. But then it's also got this really great world building, which is what George Lucas could do extremely well, was really bring the textures of these worlds out and help them feel lived in and real. And pod racing is kind of just the perfect, like, mixture of those two things, like super fun for kids and also a really cool world building scene. There's something that Sam put in our show notes doc that's on this subject, looking at this scene in terms of how it adds texture, occupied for the world occupied by non-main character people. So you really get the sense of how non-main characters, but just regular folks, go around and about in their daily life. And is there any other example we can think of in Star Wars that has this level of sort of world building for the normies of the galaxy and not just, the Skywalkers at all?
I think the closest that I could come up with, and it's not even really regular people per se, it's just non-main characters, is Canto Bight and how the rich live, right? Again, they're not the normal people of the galaxy, but it's a class of people who are not important to our story, but it does shed some light on, how they go about their lives. You have the element of kind of war profiteering that explains kind of how they have their money. You get to see, sort of very vivid sort of visual sort of depictions of these sort of hoity-toity, sneering rich people. Again, to Sam's point, it isn't the regular people. It's not a glimpse at how average folks spend their lives, but it is, I would say, world building on a slice of life in the galaxy that isn't the main characters. But I think that just emphasizes how right he is, that there aren't really other scenes that do this for regular folks.
Yeah, I was going to say Canto Bight as well as sort of the potential answer to that question. But no, I agree with you, Eric. I think this is such an extended scene, but also like the choices in it are pretty simple in how they reveal just certain details that let us kind of run with it and sort of let our imaginations do the work. And it's just little stuff from the vendor in the stands, the weird stuff he's selling that people eat. He's shown for a second, but you get that. It's okay, I now have this in my mental map of how people live. And so, maybe some of the cantina scenes help shade in this a little bit here and there. But yeah, I feel it's just one of those rare scenes in any of the films where it's a long sequence and it is important to the plot and the narrative, but we sort of are diverted into this world that's sort of under the surface of the one that the main characters are working in, but also helps explain that world in addition to being fun.
So it's not at all in the same time scale or length, but I do think one of the most effective scenes to do this in Star Wars was in The Force Awakens when Rey and Finn are leaving Jakku. They're in this firefight with Imperial forces, and there's a glimpse as I think it's a TIE fighter gets shot down. You can see scavengers already running across the sand to start getting the equipment from that ship. And there's scenes like that. It was very quick, but it was so effective in this is how people live, and this is the opportunity of a lifetime for these people.
Yeah, the urgency of that moment. I mean,
yeah.
I think that's a great example because it's brief in terms of time, but it's very rich and packed in terms of exposition.
Just a really quick thing. I watched a couple of the deleted scenes from the pod racing sequence, and in one of them, a pod racer crashes, and I mean, this was a little gratuitous, but there's 30 seconds of Jawas going to scavenge the wreck of the pod race, or the pod racer, and them getting shot at by Tusken Raiders, and it's a whole thing. But they cut that. They cut that from the sequence. But it still works.
That's another thing that's really great about the pod race is all these little vignettes of how not just the people in the stands, but other people are interacting with the racers, right? You have the Tusken Raiders. You have there's actually one shot where the pod racers go up a ramp and people have to run out of the way, and they bust through this just fence or gate or something.
Yes,
and
that's when Anakin is pushed off the trail and then he has to come back. Yeah.
And there's actually, this is I think the only canonical appearance, at least in the movies, of Aura Singh, the bounty hunter.
Yeah, I noticed her.
She's there. They expanded on her in the Clone Wars, but this was her moment of fame in the movies, and it makes you wonder what she was doing there. Was she watching? Did she have a contract out on one of these hunters or one of these racers? So it's these little things that make you wonder what kinds of what kinds of tapestries of life grow and form around these big events.
Maybe she went back in time and was going after Anakin.
Oh, we need
Ooh,
to do
I
an
love
entire
that.
episode on all the characters who might have been on that mission.
Yeah,
Wait,
go
so
back in time.
So this gets at another one of my hobby horses about the whole pod racing thing, which is like, this would be the perfect subject for some kind of miniseries. And because the bounty hunting thing sort of got me thinking about, like, so if you are deeply familiar with the world of pod racing, aka you played the N64 game a lot, perhaps too much as a child, and got familiar with all the like individual backstories of all the pod racers, like, it's crazy. Like, so I don't think too much about it, because you're like, it kind of all like starts to not make too much sense, and you start to think that pod racing is just like an excuse for like bounty hunters to do stuff. But like, half the pod racers are just in there to kill other pod racers. And there's one pod racer, Dudbolt, who has the rig that looks sort of like a electric razor, and his job is basically to just like be an enforcer and like knock out other pod racers in order to like, it's all connected to like the betting and like, but then there's also personal vendettas and stuff. It's all super, I mean, compelling and weird to me, but it makes you think, like, there's all these crazy stories, and like, I feel like you could have a ton of fun with that in a miniseries, because it just like looks so cool, and like, you know, clearly like there's an appetite for kind of seedy underworld stories, and like it doesn't get more seedy underworld than pod racing.
I mean, you could even have half the show take place off the racetrack and just be about, you know, these people and how they interact with each other and clash with each other in other settings, right? Whether it is in that big, yeah, like, I guess it's the pod racing equivalent of a horse stable, but like the place where the chance cube scene happens, you know, I'm sure they run into each other a lot there. You know, you have sort of a built-in hierarchy with Sebulba as the top dog, various other people, as you said, Sam, playing sort of classic sort of roles within this universe of bumping other people out, or, you know, you could have the kind of rube of the week who comes in and thinks that he can make it big on the Bunta Eve, you know, pod racing circuit, and then he is dead by the end of the episode. There's plenty of ways to make these people stand out, as opposed to it just being like Sebulba and then pod racers, you know, 2 through 7. Like, I think you could actually make this interesting in the same way. You know, it's basically just layering the idea of Star Wars on top of like a racing show, right? Or any kind of competition show where, you know, you have the horse, you know, jockeys or whatever. I mean, any analogy you want to draw to something that we've seen in the real world, and this just adds, you know, Star Wars technology and locations to it.
I should say one of the pod racers is even a former journalist in this world. He was a pod racing journalist.
Oh,
yes.
I didn't know that.
You need to tell us more about this.
Clegg, hold fast. We can get into that.
Oh, Clegg. Okay, Clegg. Yeah.
Who in the extended cut, deleted scenes has a rough go of things. But anyway, yeah, that's just like, that's the level of detail. And I think most of this stuff is not canonical at this point. And a lot of the detail is added by whoever wrote the little game booklet for the N64 game. Whoever that person is, great job. Hope you're listening. But, you know, to Eric's point, like the array of stories that could be told would be pretty fun.
He worked for Pod Racing Quarterly. Sorry, I've Googled him now.
One of us could take his place.
Oh, that would be such a fun job. You get guaranteed seats to all these events. You might, unfortunately, you might get killed if a piece of the engine flies out into the stands, but it would be so cool.
As I was rewatching it, I was kind of struck again by how freaking dangerous it is. I mean, pretty much all of them get into vicious hits or car crashes, pod crashes that look pretty fatal. They don't really, except for Sebulba's, look like one that you're gonna walk away from.
Wait. I have to blow everyone's mind here for a second. There's only one confirmed death in the entire Bunta Classic.
What?
I don't believe that.
It's 100% true.
That's a cover-up.
It's the guy who crashes into the stalagmite in
His
the cave.
name is Ratts Tyrell. Okay, let's be respectful. Ratts Tyrell, who has a non-canonical backstory that is frankly ridiculous. And if I read it to you, which I certainly can, you would think
Yeah,
I was
read it.
joking.
Tell us right now.
All right. So, so he dies. Obviously, he hits the stalactite because his accelerator broke. And the little sound that he makes, iconic. The whole sequence. It's pretty wonderful. So so here I'm just gonna read this. Tyrell's family was devastated after his death. It ultimately had a large effect on the sport of pod racing. Moved by his father's death, Ratts Tyrell's son, whose name is Deland, eventually established the Ratts Tyrell Foundation, which was an organization devoted to making pod racing a safer sport in order to preserve the lives of those pilots who had wives and children. So he did leave behind a wife and 3 children. The foundation, according to Wikipedia, actually did have quite a lot of impact in it. It could be one of the reasons that it was eventually banned. So that, again, weirdly deep backstories here, but he is the only confirmed fatality in
Sam, we're gonna now have you. This is we didn't tell you about this, but we haze all of our guests, so we're now gonna have you do your best impression of the iconic sound that Ratts Tyrell makes as he bites it. Go and all right, so we'll give you a 3 count: 3, 2, 1, and go for Sam. Okay, we'll insert the actual audio here so our audience can judge for themselves.
There's a little more throatiness to it, and I was a little too nasal.
It was a valiant effort.
The only good impression I do is the announcer who doesn't speak Hutt, the one who speaks normal. But we can save that for later.
Wow, normal. Man just said that on a podcast like it's nothing.
Well, now you have to do that impression. Now you can't just tell us these things.
Well, we'll see. But maybe I don't know how the outro works. Maybe we can end with.
Are you talking about Fode and Beed?
Fode and Beed. That's right.
Oh man, I would love to do the outro with one of us as Fode and the other as Beed.
Great. Well, I'm not going to do that, so either one of you could do that. And actually, this does bring me to my next question, kind of about Fode and Beed. Who is everyone's, I want to go down the list and have everyone tell me, who are our favorite completely random characters in the sequence? Because for me, it is those 2 sportscasters who are perhaps 2 people, but also maybe just 1 person with 2 different heads. And then at the end, they go, ooh, ah, and it's very exciting. So I love them. I love the texture of having sportscasters for pod racing, and it's very much like horse racing or any other kind of sport. So they're my pick. Haley, who is your favorite?
No, I need
character?
to do more prep. Go to Eric.
Eric, who's your favorite?
So it probably is Fode and Beed, but
no, I chose them.
All right, well then I'll go with Kitster, who is not technically restricted to the pod racing scene because he's Anakin's friend and you see him earlier, but you really only interact with him in the context of the anticipation of the pod race and then the pod race itself. But I just love there's one moment where Anakin zooms by and it lingers on Kitster and Anakin's other friends, and he does just like a little jump and like a little dance in place because he's so happy for his friend. So Kitster would probably be my pick. By the way, since I think we're all Fode and Beed stands here, did you know, Grace, that Beed is played by comedian and frequent Whose Line Is It Anyway guest star Greg Proops?
Interesting.
Really?
I did not know that.
Come to think of it, he sort of does sound like the Wait, Don't Tell Me guy a little bit.
Peter Sagal? Now that's an interesting comparison. We'll have to look that up later. But he does have the best line in the movie, which is, "I don't care what universe you're from, that's gotta hurt." Which is truly iconic.
That's pretty good, Eric.
That was
Thank
a
you.
pretty good one. But actually, we were just thinking about that line because it makes no sense. Everyone's only from one universe, and they're also only from one galaxy. It would make sense if he said, "I don't care what system you're from, that's gotta hurt." But, like,
Unbelievable! You just had to ruin it, Grace. No, I think what he's anticipating is the possibility of a multiverse, and I think what we'll find in our Disney Plus series is that various versions of all these pod racers, including Ratts Tyrell, will come through a portal from their own universes. It'll be like Spider-Man No Way Home, and we'll see like Ratts Tyrell with like a mustache, like the Star Trek Mirror universe. We'll see like Anakin, but if he were like an adult and not Darth Vader, because they're going to introduce the concept of the multiverse, but they're going to do it on our pod racing show.
Fode and Beed is actually Doctor Strange.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I was going to say Fode and Beed and the Multiverse of Madness.
Well, I think we have our episode title.
You all are glossing over the obvious MVP of the sequence, which is Ben Quadranero.
No, I was going to say that one, and you stole mine. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I got first dibs up. Ben Quadraneros.
You just have to feel bad for him. The man cannot catch a break.
He cannot catch a break. He has a very unique rig. Pretty overpowered in the video game, if you ask me. But yeah, it's sort of like one of those good, like, we really are invited into Ben Quadraneros' story. And
it's a story of his suffering.
A story of his suffering, and
and persistence.
And if you come to that scene with the proper context, you know that like Ben Quadraneros is like a real hotshot. He's like one of the most successful pod racers in the galaxy. Later goes on to have a distinguished career, in fact, and does a head-to-head race with Sebulba years later. But, this guy is supposed to be, like, among the best, like, as good as Sebulba. And so if you're watching him, I mean, the scene works on any level, no matter who you are, obviously. And Ben Quadraneros' story is a universal one that we can all relate to in one way or another. But this is like Usain Bolt can't get off the starting block. He can't do it. That's the Ben Quadraneros story. Also, like, man, we haven't really talked about the character design of a lot of the pod racers and just how hilarious it is. And Ben Quadraneros definitely a good example of that.
Can I give you some Benny Quad trivia, which is he became the favorite character of a sort of influential Star Wars fan named Kyle Newman, who actually directed a movie called Fanboys, which was about a plot to break into Lucasfilm and steal the print of the Phantom Menace. And so his wife actually played Aura Singh in the Clone Wars, and so they sort of became this like Star Wars fandom power couple, and he's friends with Dave Filoni, and Dave added him to some posters, like promotional posters in the background of a couple of Clone Wars episodes. So Anakin's little like workshop where Obi-Wan goes to talk to him during the Clovis story arc. Anakin has I'm pretty sure I'm remembering this correctly, a poster on the wall because he's a pod racing fan and a champion himself, and he has a poster on the wall of Ben Quadraneros. So, and that is because of this guy Kyle Newman. So I wanted to shout him out because hopefully he's a Hoth Takes listener. I doubt it, but Kyle, if you're listening, I gave you your Ben Quadraneros your due.
That is a deep cut right there.
Listen, I know so many things. None of them will ever help me in life, but when I have the opportunity to mention them here on the Hoth Takes podcast, this is really the only chance I'm going to get. So,
all right, Haley, who's your favorite other than
Sam? So I thought I was really clever to have like landed on an answer to this question, but then Sam stole it.
I mean, it's a good answer. You can take it.
I mean, I'm gonna go with I think Eric already said this as well, but he wasn't a pod racer, but Anakin's friend, who was like there cheering him on. Yes,
he's cute.
So nobody picked Sebulba. Okay, so nobody's going with Sebulba.
Well, Sebulba's like Sebulba's a major character.
Okay, I guess we did say like random small characters. Okay.
Yes. So I do also want to get Sam's take on Sebulba and the character of Sebulba, and just
What can we learn from Sebulba?
What can we learn from Sebulba?
What can we learn from Sebulba?
Sam was like, oh man, I thought I could get away with just saying that and moving on. But no such luck. Not here on the Hot Takes podcast. We follow up on this show.
Yeah. If the only contribution of Sebulba were the sound of his pod racing rig, that would be enough. But thankfully he has contributed so much more than that. I feel like they just kind of nailed it with the whole like sort of look, vibe, like that is exactly how the character needed to like look. I just, in a film, and perhaps I'm kicking over a beehive here, in which there are some questionable choices made regarding character design and CGI and all that stuff. Like, I do think they stuck the landing on Sebulba and conveyed the vibe that like the head honcho, like bad boy pod racer should have. There is some stuff, like, I don't know how he gets away with just like basically complete cheating like the entire time, and how no one else has thought to put weapons on their pod racing rig. Like, in some of the deleted scenes, he just has a flamethrower on.
Doesn't he have like a buzzsaw too?
He has a buzzsaw, a flamethrower, and it's like, okay, you guys know that he's doing this, so like, what is stopping you from doing this also yourself?
He's just working smarter.
He's this is like a one-man arms race, and everyone's like, Sebulba's out there with the flamethrower again. Oh man, nothing I can do about this. And Anakin just sort of like, in the deleted scene, just sort of like gets out of the way of the flamethrower. And others aren't so lucky. But yeah, maybe there's a deeper story to be told here about like why, Sebulba is like the only one doing this. But yeah, I don't have too many deep thoughts about him, other than I think like this was an important character for them to nail the vibe for the scene to kind of work. And I'm not saying that Sebulba is like the main reason or a leading reason why the scene works, but like they needed to get it right, and they did. And I love
that he just has like masseuses like working on him in the like
right.
Like whatever that room would be called, the like holding area or whatever.
Yeah, and again, not to harp on this, but I do think like, and I'd be curious your guys' takes. Like, I don't think that any scene, aside from like there's classic Star Wars sounds and stuff, but like as a scene like of various sounds, like if you just like listen to it, I just don't think that there's a better sounding scene in the entire films. Serious, I'm 100% serious about this.
Yeah, no, I love the sound of it. I will do my Sebulba's pod racer impression, which is like a whoop 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 whoop.
All right, wait, now let's pause. We'll pause for a second because I'm going to insert the actual sound here. So just pause for a second. Okay, go ahead.
All right. But my favorite sound in the Star Wars series, actually, I know exactly what it is, and it is in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and it is the chargers that Jango Fett and a young Boba Fett throw at Obi-Wan, who is in pursuit, and they throw these chargers. They're called some kind of chargers, but I don't remember what they're called. Eric probably knows.
Sonic charges. It's fine.
Sonic,
go ahead.
that's it. That's what they are. And he throws them at it, and they go completely silent. And then they make this dramatic, like, noise, which you can also insert the actual noise here.
Now Eric's like, I gotta go to Attack of the Clones.
Oh my god, so
and
much
find
work.
One sound. Yeah.
It's just an extremely satisfying sound. It just feels right. But other than that, I do think that the sound mixing editing for the pod racing is pretty incredible.
You know, I have to say that I think my favorite sound is in the pod racing sequence, but not actually during the race itself. And I'm surprised nobody's brought this up yet, because at one point Jar Jar is walking around next to the sort of horse type creatures that pull the pod racers out onto the starting lineup. And Sam, I think you probably know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
It's a class. Again, you want to talk about classic sounds of Star Wars, truly elevating the art form of cinema. He turns around and finds himself staring at the rear end of one of these creatures, and the creature looks back at him. And folks, I think it's the one and only example in the Star Wars universe of flatulence. So that does happen. We're not going to insert that sound into Hoth Takes because we're better than that, but not better than bringing it up. But certainly we're not going to include the actual sound. But I did have to mention that because, again, Sam, that is an iconic element of this sequence that people will always associate with the pod racing sequence when they remember, oh yeah, wasn't there one fart in Star Wars?
You know, I didn't add up for me until just now. Yet another reason why the pod racing sequence is the most iconic sequence in all of Star Wars. There's also a really dumb Jar Jar moment in this sequence where Anakin pulls off the maneuver where he overtakes Sebulba by jettisoning it off in the air from like the off ramp whatever thing, and he lands in front of him, and like several seconds pass, like the crowd cheers, and Jar Jar goes, "Did he crash it?" And it's like, dude, he didn't crash. Like the whole crowd is going nuts. Like he just overtook Sebulba, and it's like,
Well, he was watching on a delayed feed. His data pad was not the latest model.
Clearly. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I had forgotten about it until rewatching it today, and I was like, ah.
Well, the pod racing and Anakin's victory also brought up the great quote from my boy, the legendary Dom Toretto of the Fast and Furious series, where he says more than once something like, "It's not about the car, it's about the driver." You can pretend that I said that in Vin Diesel's deep and seductive voice. But Anakin, he's basically driving the equivalent of a tin can on strings, and he's able to overtake the biggest and baddest of the pod racers. And as I was rewatching this, I had forgotten how janky Anakin's little pod racer was and how often he had to fix it. And it's like the boy is 9 years old and he's in a death race and also having to fix his little pod racer in real time. It's just, that is some real driving. So respect to 9-year-old Anakin.
Well, yeah, that's all definitely true. I mean, like, I was struck by like Qui-Gon like lifts him into the pod, and he's like, "Whoa!" Like Qui-Gon just lifted me, and it's like, dude, you're about to like fly hundreds of feet into the air at like 200 miles an hour to like overtake like a crazy like murderous pod racing monster. Like it's it just made me laugh. But you guys should go on some of the YouTube comment sections for some of the pod racing videos where people earnestly discuss like the physics involved that would explain how Anakin like overtakes the rest of the field, even though he suffers what like should have been like an insurmountable obstacle in his pod racer not starting for the top of the race, and he's there for like 15 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever it is. Like that should have been game over. And just I want everyone to be comforted by the fact that there is a community of people out there, dozens of people perhaps even, who have discussed the mathematical, what would be required for Anakin to have overtaken the field.
Well, I would be remiss if I did not mention a topic which Sam has brought up to me many times, and which, when I mentioned our topic for tonight's episode to my boyfriend also brought this up unbidden, and that is the video game, the pod racing video game, which apparently is very formative for people who were around in the late 90s, early 2000s and playing video games. So I just wanted to get your little take, Sam, on why the video game is so iconic, because everyone I've talked to about this topic who's played the video game has taken the time to tell me how cool and great the video game was.
Yeah. No, I'm thank you. As somebody who played every Star Wars video game made between the years of, let's call it 1998 to, 2008 or something. I think the pod racing video game was the best one out of all of those. And I say that not because it was like remarkably ambitious or visionary. It was just incredibly fun. And I'm so glad that they decided to do a video game based on it. It's like remains one of just the most fun racing video games I think like ever made, period. And it takes this like great sequence and like makes kind of a whole world out of it that you can explore, and you do these races on all different kinds of planets, and like you're on Sebulba's homeworld of Malastare, pod racing, and you get to each of the characters that are in the actual scene for a couple seconds or whatever are like full-fledged characters in this world, and you can like improve their pods like over time as you win races. And the music is great, the vibe is great. The like main menu thing of the game has like Watto just like mumbling sort of in a melodical way. It's just like they made some interesting choices and they all work. And to your point, Grace, like everyone, like I feel like whenever I talk about the pod racing game with people, everyone has that same like reaction of having an emotional connection with it. And I think about it sometimes, and I was thinking about it earlier, like it's just a racing game, but it connects to the magic of the sequence. And my last broader point is like I think very few of the video games like so like hit on that like connection with what makes the film special as like cleanly as this video game does, and like kind of a lot like makes you feel like you're experiencing it too. So
yeah, I think Kaylee, if I recall correctly, you said your husband was also very into the pod racing video game.
Not the video game, he's just a Phantom Menace fan. One of our first like conversations when we started dating was about Star Wars, and he was like, "Oh, Phantom Menace is the best Star Wars movie." He still
and that's when you knew you had to marry him.
Right, obviously, it was unavoidable at that point. So no, he quotes it all the time. Not the video game, but the film. Definitely Sebulba and Jar Jar.
There was something I wanted to mention about the way that the pod race scene draws you in and makes you feel exhilarated, and obviously the video game taps into that. And it's that, George Lucas has, he comes from this era, the 50s, where in, Modesto, California, where he grew up, this sort of driving culture was a paramount experience for young people. And I mean, that's why he made American Graffiti, was to sort of capture that fading sense of you would just go and drive through town at night, and you would occasionally find yourself driving alongside somebody. You would try to do a little bit of a race there down the street. You'd sort of pick up women this way. I mean, it was a sense of just, you'd put the windows down and you would just blast down the street, wind in your hair, not a care in the world. And it's that sense of speed and barely keeping it, controlled, and competing with somebody else who you kind of just met or just, turned onto the street, just ran into. And that was obviously why he made American Graffiti. But there's the DNA of that sort of cruising kind of culture in the pod race scene, in the sort of the way that the racers kind of bounce the pods off of each other, give each other these looks as they're going down the stretch. It's very much sort of that sense that I think he was trying to put into the scene. And because it's grounded in something real, and all the little moments are homages to real sort of behaviors of young people from that era, it feels real because the skeleton of it is real.
I think that's a great point, Eric, and I think that's like the reason why Sebulba's rig doesn't sound like spacey and futuristic. Like it sounds like a V8 like Chevy convertible.
Yeah, and I mean, they mixed these sounds from old cars that would either be so old that there was something wrong with them, so you get that kind of guttural engine noise that an actual healthy car wouldn't have, but for something that's this hulking monstrosity like Sebulba's Pod Racer, you want it to have that sound. So they definitely did. I mean, they did this with, X-Wings and stuff too, but particularly when you talk about the Pod Racers, it's important that it does evoke, not just visually, but also in terms of the sound, that sense of a giant, hot rod, right? Or something that you rig together to cruise down the street. And I think they nailed it.
I was comparing this in my mind earlier, the pod racing sequence, to other sort of famous trench racing sequences in Star Wars. Very famously, you have the trench run in Episode 4, where Luke Skywalker drops the bomb so that he can blow up the Death Star. And then in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, they have the really cool hover bike chase with the stormtroopers on Endor. I think there is very clearly the influence of the pod racing in the Canto Bight sequence, and not only that sort of world building, but also having the chase of the fake horses whose species name I cannot remember at the moment. And I do think that what sets apart the pod racing from other sort of trench racing sequences is that it just kind of combines all of these things that we've just been talking about, but that also really fundamentally hits on something that makes Star Wars special, and that's that sense of sort of wonder and childlike enjoyment. And obviously this is not universal. Not everyone enjoys racing scenes, but there's something about it that very much does hit those kind of Star Wars pleasure centers where you just feel like a little kid watching it, and it's really fun and special.
Yeah, I mean the Episode 2, speeder chase through Coruscant, is a great example of that. I mean, it really does. You got the lights and the sounds and the neon billboards and all the other speeders that are in the way, and it's kind of like the pod race with even more obstacles, right? I mean, it gives you that sense of speed, but the pod race does it in a really grounded way that, as Sam has said, adds in this kind of look at the texture of everyday life. So I think, those are both kind of, they evoke that a similar feeling.
We haven't gotten to this, and I'm somewhat surprised about the narrative significance of the pod racing scene. Do we think Sebulba, like, years later is like, if I had won that race, like, there would be no Darth Vader? Like, did I just like make the biggest screw up like in the history of the galaxy? So I put that question to you all. Is Sebulba to blame for the rise of Darth Vader?
Wow. Yeah, I think so. I think that's fair. Let's go ahead and blame it all on Sebulba.
I think, yes, it's all Sebulba's fault. Definitely not Palpatine. He had some things to do about it, but
I disagree. No, Eric, I tried to say that about Obi-Wan during the Kenobi show, and you shot me down.
That's true. I have to be consistent here. I think really it's Watto's fault, because Watto was the one who let him race. It was all up to Watto. It was his racer, but he was betting everything on Sebulba.
Watto should have doubled down on slavery for the good of the galaxy.
Wow.
You got to rewatch the scene and be like, Sebulba, just like nudge him into a wall of rocks, man. Come on, just like do it. So there's, it could be a little disorienting but fun exercise to view Sebulba as the hero of the failed hero of this sequence.
Watto, big mistake.
Wow.
Ha ha ha
Ha ha.
Hoodoo, as a wise man once said. Hoodoo.
All right. Those were pretty much all the points that I wanted to hit, but before we sign off,
we need the impression from Sam.
Well, now I feel bad because I think Eric's is better. So
I think you two should compete.
I don't know. I don't know if I can compete. I feel like the Dud Bold of impressions here. I'm just here to cause
deep
chaos.
Cut. Only real heads get that one.
No, I think we should let Eric. It was really that was just a wonderful rendition of the "That's Gotta Hurt" quote, and so game gotta recognize game.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The only other thing I wanted to say about the pod racing scene is it does give us this funny moment with Anakin trying to show off in front of Padme, but Kitster totally blows up his spot because he's like, yeah, man, like, I'm sure you'll do it this time. And Padme's like, do what? And Kitster has this great line where he goes, finish the race, of course. And Padme's like, wait, you've never won or even completed one of these races before? And I'm like, I'm trusting you to win us the money to repair my ship and get us back into this war. And he's like, don't worry, I got this. And Qui-Gon's like, oh yeah, no, you've definitely got it. You've definitely got it. He doesn't got it. He doesn't got it. It's just a fun little moment.
You know what? Really, this is all Qui-Gon's fault for, setting this poor child up for likely failure, and then he did succeed. But also, I mean, that was a really big risk to set this little bowl cut 9-year-old in this race.
Or at least not, saving his mom too. If anything is Qui-Gon's fault, it is like saving Anakin, but not Shmi. But that's a whole separate conversation.
That's not Sebulba's fault.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for coming on the podcast, talking about pod racing, making this a moment where we could say, now this is podcasting. You have truly made this moment podcasting for us with this incredible episode and discussion.
No, this was really fun, and I didn't think this was possible, but I have new thoughts to entertain about the pod racing sequence, so gonna give it a fresh watch later.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you want to share your thoughts about this episode and particularly pod racing, or suggest topics for future shows, you can email us at hothcakes@gmail.com or find us on Twitter at hothcakes. I'm at Grace_Seegers on Twitter. Eric is at Eric Geller. Haley is at Burdenator. And Sam is at Sam Brodey. Haley made our incredible logo and banner art, and Eric edited the show and put together our music, although for legal purposes we should note that all Star Wars themes and sound effects are the intellectual property of Lucasfilm. You can find a complete archive of past episodes on our website, hothtakes.wordpress.com. If you like the show, share it with a friend. You can find Hoth Takes on all the major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. We'll see you next time. May the Force be with you.